Hi everyone, this is Aisha Subhani here. Welcome to our panel. And today we're going to talk about COVID-19 and its implications on microfinance institutions in terms of the effects, the impacts, and the strategies that they adopt during the pandemic. So the order of presentation I would like to share with you. Our first presenter would be talking about earn more, save more, borrow less, students from rural Ghana, microfinance plus street food, women, resilience to COVID, and other shop. It's by Orly, James Coopstick, and Rebecca. The second one would be titling Impact of the Pandemic on Livelihoods, Empirical Findings of Microfinance Beneficiaries from Rural Areas of Pakistan by Tom Maliki, Asad Walid, and Roxana. They are presenting another paper titling, titled Social Protection Measures. Sorry, yes, Social Protection Measures and their role in mitigating the impact of COVID on microfinance borrowers funding from Pakistan. And they're presenting two papers. And in the last, we have a case of a Hubert microfinance organization in Pakistan, Ahmed Nawaz and I would like to mention that each of the presenter would be given 20 minutes in all. We would request you to complete your presentation in 15 minutes, and we'll give you an signal just 5 minutes prior to time and then 5 minutes for the question and answer. So every presentation in all will not exceed 5 minutes. So we would appreciate if you could all abide by these little, arrangements that we have made so that everyone gets fair time to present. So I now begin with the first presentation. I hope you all are ready. Can you hear me? Because your mic is, yes. So,
Okay, yeah.
yes. So your team members are there? Should we begin?
Yes, indeed. So thank you, Aisha, and I hope I can now share a screen so that can people see that screen?
Yes.
Very good. So we're two people presenting from the University of Bath. Our third associate, Rebecca Avard, is not with us. She's actually on holiday. She works for Bath Social and Development Research. And this work was also conducted in collaboration with PDA associates in Accra in Ghana, who took responsibility for all the field work. And the title, Earn More, Save More, Borrow Less, is partly a way of unsettling the debate, which often becomes polarized around those who are promoting more credit-led models of microfinance and those who are promoting more savings-led models. So if I move on, what we're going to do, I'm going to speak first, then Aurelie is going to take over. I'm going to set the context, both in terms of theory and literature, and in terms of methodology. We're then going to present you with a straightforward case study, which is an impact evaluation of a program in Ghana, a long-standing program run by two Ghanaian banks, the Sinapiaba Savings and Loan and the Opportunity International Savings and Loan organizations. And this is a Credit Plus program in which they were receiving additional funds to complement the savings and credit services they provide commercially through their partner organization, Opportunity International UK, with funding from the UK government. And we're going to talk about how we contributed to the evaluation of this program, which is ongoing, and present some findings and draw some conclusions. So the theoretical context, which I can't go into in great detail, but I'm sure is familiar to many of you, is that microfinance as part of the wider agenda of financial inclusion is still heavily contested space. And in a journal article in the Canadian Journal of Development Studies a few years ago with colleagues, I presented a sort of history of these competing mental models. And we're all familiar with a mainstream model, which really sees the development problem or the poverty problem as one of financial exclusion, and therefore how to include more people, going all the way back to the global credit summits and so on. And then we have a very strong strand of criticism now, which actually turns that around and says that microfinance is at the vanguard of adversely incorporating people into a global financial system, which is often on very unfavorable terms and creates all kinds of problems. And they are seeking to problematize financialization. And Milford Bateman is one well-known representative of that critical strand of microfinance. One of the things that comes out of the criticism is a strong emphasis on local development, saving local models of financial development, savings-led models, and a particular criticism of the more minimalist credit-led models. Our position, which we're quite open about, is that we want to subvert and unsettle globalizing paradigms and discourses. We think that microfinance is not easily collapsed into one meta discourse. We think it's about messy, disparate, complex, context-specific changes. It's all about context, and therefore it's all about generating better and more granular evidence of what's actually happening to individual clients, branches, organizations, contexts. So we are both sensitive to the criticisms of microcredit in its excess in many contexts. I wouldn't want to downplay that at all. Another of our colleagues, Matilda Maitro at Bath, has written very critically of the Bangladesh experience, for example. But at the same time, we don't want to settle the debate in development studies around one sort of dominant discourse that all microfinance is somehow bad and is yesterday's story. So the antidote to that is more and better evidence. And of course, that then raises another methodological, another debate, which continues to rage over how best to elicit credible evidence of what's happening in the everyday lives of people who save and borrow through different kinds of financial, increasingly digital mechanisms. And again, we can make a broad distinction, often forgotten, but of course, most impact evaluation of microfinance is done by practitioners pragmatically through learning in the field, what Aristotle called through phronesis, contextualized wisdom. And that is immensely powerful and immensely important. And us academics often forget it. The problem is it's credible to those on the ground, but it's not so accessible when being shared more widely and as the basis for generalization. We've seen a reaction against the pragmatism and lack of evaluation in terms of a resurgence of positivist approaches to evaluating microfinance with a hierarchy of evidence and the randomistas and randomized control trials sitting at the top of that. I have a problem with that too, because I think it's expensive, it's clunky, it's inflexible, and it also inherently generalizes across populations in order to give us average treatments effects. So I've, for many years with colleagues, have been pursuing a more realist perspective, which seeks more qualitative forms of feedback that somehow occupy the awkward middle ground between a more narrowly positivist route, might be called post-positivist, it might be called interpretive, which combines quantitative monitoring with high quality qualitative evaluation of what people say is happening to them. And what we're presenting is an illustrative case study of that approach. Here are the actors in this particular case study, which I've already mentioned. What's now the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office of the UK, providing Opportunity International UK with funding to support its partners in Ghana, well-established microfinance institutions, well-established branch networks. The idea of the program is to supplement the basic financial services which are provided commercially with training, empowerment training, agricultural training, and also facilitation of linkages between savings, autonomous savings and loan groups and external sources of finance, and particularly promoting the savings approach. The evaluation was commissioned and is being conducted by a university spin-off from the University of Bath, Bath Social and Development Research, in collaboration with PDA in Ghana, who are a long-standing partner with whom we've done a number of evaluations now. And Aisha will be interested to hear, this is our antidote to the COVID problem of doing fieldwork, which was we never do fieldwork anymore. We always work with a local partner, and we've worked very hard, even before COVID, to find ways of enabling us to do that effectively, to reduce air travel, motivated more by climate change than by our worries about COVID. So this is an independent study, and our starting point was the theory of change of the organization. We haven't got time to go through this, but the point to note is, and it is simplified, is it's a multiple package program: institutional capacity building, community engagement, gender focused women's capacity building, financial literacy, access to inclusive financial services. So it's very explicitly the mid-level theory here is that you need a combination of inputs to have more transformative impacts. This program is also extended into the Democratic Republic of Congo, but we're just going to talk about the Ghana component in this presentation. And onto the methodology. As I say, this is mixed methods that we're using. There is a baseline survey, which Aurélie has also been involved in analyzing, but we haven't done the end line yet, so we can't report on the before-after changes in our quantitative indicators across a more representative sample of clients from this program. Alongside that, though, and in order to get at the causality problems rather than measuring change, we've been conducting these QIP surveys. QIP stands for the Qualitative Impact Protocol. It's a qualitative impact evaluation tool that we tested in Ghana and Ethiopia with research funding from the UK government. We then set up Bath SDR as a spin-off company to promote it under and to explore its use in a wider range of contexts. And we've now used the QIP in more than 20 countries, with more than 40 studies from Northwest Pakistan to Cochabamba in Bolivia, to Indonesia, and indeed Bristol in the UK. And there is a book that writes up experiences of the first 3 years of using the QIP in commercial context to do independent evaluation as an intermediate form of technology for doing impact evaluation at a granular level. It relies on self-reported attribution. We're collecting narrative case studies from clients of their explanation of what has driven change in their lives. In this case, we're reporting on 48 narrative interviews alongside 8 focus groups, which are gender and age specific. We deliberately blindfold, to the extent possible, our interviewers and the clients, so they're not aware of what the evaluation is focused on, what the evaluand is. That's not always possible. There are lots of issues with that, which we've written about extensively, but the idea is to reduce confirmation bias. We want people to tell us stories about what's happening in their lives, not what they think we want to know about a specified program. And to get around that, we have no connection with that program. We don't even raise it in the interview. But what we are clear is we're interested in how financial services are affecting their lives and livelihoods. And we want the whole story, not just one potted version to suit what they think we need to know. So that's a big part of the QIP methodology. The methodology is confirmatory. The analysts, looking at the transcripts of narrative data in which people tell the stories of what's happened to them, within a specified period. The analysts will compare that with a theory of change of the project and say, does this confirm in a Bayesian way, or does this not confirm what we thought was going to happen? But the approach is also exploratory. It's open to the unexpected because we're not signaling to the respondents what we're looking for. Case study is purposive. We're not aiming to generate average statistics across the sample. What we're trying to do is to capture the diversity of experience of clients. So we deliberately sample for positive and negative deviance. In this case, we deliberately included people from branches which were performing badly in terms of repayment. And we deliberately selected clients in those branches who were performing well and badly in terms of their overall level of indebtedness. So we're capturing diversity here in order to understand the range of experiences that people are having, not rush to bold generalizations about it being good or bad. And we do that by turning the stories that people tell us into causal maps. These are simple diagrams of the causal explanations they have for what's going well and what's going badly in different domains of their life. And that's what we're going to present to you in an illustrative way. The core of this is a new piece of software, which we've now been through 3 generations of developing, where we take the text like this on the left, typical narrative test. I have expanded both cash and food crop cultivation in the last 2 years. I've received fertilizers from the government, etc., etc. The coder, our analysts, analyze causal claims. There's a cause and there's a driver and there's an outcome that is coded, and that turns text into quantitative data, which we can then use to draw diagrams.
You need to speed up.
Okay. So what Aurelie is now going to do is to just show you the kind of data that we produce in the form of these qualitative maps. Before doing that, there's some very, very quick charts to just show that in this case, roughly half the sample felt they were doing well, and roughly half felt that they were doing badly. Yeah. So we've got a mixed sample here, but that's just what they reported in terms of change. What we now move on to is what they say is happening and why, and whether the credit or the financial services or the credit plus is making a difference. Over to you, Aurelie.
Thank you. So here you see that with the type of maps and graphs we get from using the causal map software. So here, when you look at the training part, you see that they mentioned the fact that the support they received explicitly from Opportunity International, so from that program, led to improve agricultural practices and management, and they enabled them to access and use better farm equipment such as tractors, etc. Those 2 main components led to increased crop production and increased yield, which led to, you can follow the story of change here, increased income from farming source, and it led to higher level of outcome, investment into non-farming businesses and increased in non-farming business. So we'll see that in more detail in the following slides. So,
shall I move on?
Yes, please.
Okay. So story here is complexity, where credit and saving interact. And the numbers are the number of coded citations that make that causal claim.
So based on the title of our presentation, we looked more into the financial components and of the story and the program. So you have being able to save more, borrow less, and what were the overall effect of loans. So here you look at saving more, and we look at on the left side at all the drivers that led people to be able to save more. And you see what we saw in the previous slides and the story is that it comes from being able to earn more money, both from farming and non-farming activities. But there are also other drivers external to those two aspects, and that are also very important. You see the being member of savings group, both from the program and other, uh, played a key role in being able to save more. So the collective aspect is still very important from the personal story of being able to earn more money. And on the right side, you see, okay, they are able to save more. What come next? Is there anything next, actually? Where is it where the story ends? Or do we know more about what they were able to do with this extra money they were able to set aside? And here you see that among the reported outcome, there are example of investment they were able to do both in farming and non-farming businesses, and um, immediate needs they were able to fulfill, such as paying school fees. And which is an interesting aspect we found is that these use of the savings are about the same as the use they report of the loans. So in a way, they don't earmark the money by its source to specific use. They seem to be using either the loans or their savings for the same purposes. Next slide. So we looked also at the borrowing less part of the story, because it was mentioned in the overall stories we just saw. And there are both positive and negative drivers to being in a position to borrow less. Sometimes it was reported as a choice, and a positive results from earning more income and being able to as much as before. And this led to overall positive outcomes, such as improved self-esteem and also their position in the community. It's valued to be able to be in a position to by choice to borrow less. But you also have the side of story where it's due to, it's not their choice, it's due to negative drivers, such as their savings group failing and not being able to repay their loan. They were forced to not to borrow less than what they used to do, and this led to a feeling of being less resilient to possible shocks. And talking about shock, and the topic of the presentation this morning is really related to COVID. So on the next slide, we asked specific question about the effects of COVID. The interviews took place in August, September last year, so really in the middle of the first wave, and the measure of social distancing, etc., were in place in Ghana. So you see that most, if not all, of the immediate outcome of the COVID-19 situation was of course negative. They were less able to work in groups as they usually do. They were less able to sell their crop on market, to access the market. And you also have a whole range of personal or social outcome, being able to meet less, to hold ceremonies, etc. And those had longer term effect that we were starting to see in those interviews. So decreased income and being less able to save. Those need to be revisited, and that's definitely an aspect we will investigate more in this year round of interview for the final evaluation, because we want to know beyond those immediate effect that they were currently experiencing at the time of the interviews, what are the longer term effect of COVID. We can see that all of them were negative, except one is having better hygiene practices, which is mentioned as a positive outcome of the whole situation. So very briefly, the next slide really summed up that we see very positive stories of clients regarding the activities of the programs and what they're able to benefit from it, both the loan component, but also the training component. There are non-loan components and outcomes that we didn't know, and that we were able to discover through this methodology and the way we investigated their experience and the changes they report. So there is a separate paper on that, but that really allowed us to develop further the theory of change and unpack a little bit the black box around the outcome and impact level. And as I mentioned, regarding COVID-19, it would be very interesting to focus on the longer term effects, and that's something we will be doing this year. Thank you very much.
Just to add one final comment about the other paper, why are we doing this? We're doing this partly because Opportunity International have invited us to be challenged about what they think they're doing. So this idea of them presenting a theory of change, which comes, from their experience, is the foundation, because then we feed back the voices of their clients independently collected to enable them to rethink the theory that informs their action. So that's critical to our whole motivation in this. This is not something we're doing for academic studies. We're doing because we want to influence the ideas that drive what people do, and to make sure that influence comes from their clients, not just from global debates.
Thank you, James. It's a very interesting study, but unfortunately, since we're running short of time, I wish I could give you more time to talk about it. We don't have time left for question answer. It's just 1 minute before we begin our next presentation. So if anyone has any question to ask, please write in the chat box, and towards the end of the session, we'll be addressing those queries. So I now move on to our next presenters. We just have 1 minute. So meanwhile, if anyone wants to ask a question, please type in the chat box before our next presentation begins. And thank you very much. It seems, and it was such an interesting piece of information for all of us. But unfortunately, due to time restrictions, right now we are not able and not in a position to discuss it much.
Okay, so Aisha, by the time Isam loads the slides, can I ask a quick question? It's not really a question, it's a comment. So on slide number 13, it says that there have been some positive outcomes, which means that they have reported that their income has increased due to microfinance and all this lending, so which is a good thing, as opposed to what the critics have been saying, like Milford Bateman and all these, that microfinance has actually driven people deeper into debt. Okay, so
we now have our next presentation by Isam Malki and Roxana Qasir and Asad Khalid. You have 2 papers to present. Your first paper will end at 2:55, will end in 25 minutes. The next one will end in the other 25 minutes. So I would request you to please keep the timings in mind while presentation, because I don't like interrupting when the speakers are in a flow and they're presenting their work. So I would appreciate this. Thank you. So, okay. Yeah, please start.
Okay, all right, thanks for this. So in this paper, we look at the impact that the pandemic has produced on livelihoods. And this is on a range of borrowers and non-borrowers across the rural areas of Pakistan. So on the next slide, we show that what the primary aims are. So we look at the impact that the pandemic has had on the income of the rural poor in Pakistan. And then we compare this on the MFI clients. So we are looking at a comparison between the MFI borrowers and the non-borrowers. And then we also look at the impact that these informal saving schemes have on the economic outcomes, okay, commonly known as ROSCAs, which are known with different names in different countries, but we all know what they are: informal saving mechanisms, which have been proven to be very helpful for the rural poor. Okay, so on the next slide, we have a map of where the country is on the globe. This highlighted province is the province where the fieldwork was carried out. This is the largest, the most populous province of the country. And the next slide shows you all the 36 districts. And number 17 is where the fieldwork actually took place. Okay, so the data is based on empirical data which was collected. It's what's a very detailed household survey. We had 508 households who responded. These were across different rural parts, a group of villages just on the outskirts of the city. We captured household related aspects. Then we looked at the dwelling conditions, about the state of the house, and about the the floors and the roof and all these things. Then we looked at the ownership of the household assets. What kind of assets do they have in terms of the household? We looked at other asset-based indicators. This can be land, for example. And then we looked at food security and how vulnerable they are to shocks. This was another thing that we looked at. Okay, so from the treatment side, we look at a multi-level scale. We look at 3 groups. The first group is the non-borrowers. So these are those people who are living within the same vicinities, and they are not borrowing from any microfinance institution. The second group is those who are participants in the ROSCA schemes. And the third group is those who are borrowing from any microfinance institution. This can have those who are borrowing from one MFI or multiple MFIs. The outcome variables of interest, we looked at the household income, the household expenditure. We looked at the luxury foods and inferior foods. So luxury foods are consumption of meat, beef, mutton, chicken. Inferior foods are classified as lentils and vegetables. Very politically incorrect statements, luxury foods and inferior foods, but unfortunately we are stuck with these terms, which the World Bank has proposed. And then we looked at the stock of staple storable food supplies, which any household holds at a certain instant. So in that part of the country, wheat is considered to be a staple food. And we captured data on how much stock they have at that given instant. So going back to our foods, we captured this data based on a 7-day recall period, which is the standard across household surveys, because anything longer than that, people tend to forget. Okay, so the next slide will show our econometric methodology.
Thanks, Asad. I'll take over from here. Hello, everyone. Well, as Asad described generally, so the main aim is to measure the impact of COVID-19 on the various outcomes of 3 different groups. These 3 groups basically are our treatment groups. And what we are interested in 2 things. In first, estimating, let's say, these outcomes for each group. And then second is estimating whether there is a statistically significant difference across these 3 groups. So what we use here, given the nature of the experiment we have, is natural experiment or quasi-experiment, and the problem that suffered from like the randomization problem it has. So what we use a potential, well, we use a methodology that is suited to this, known as potential outcome model. And this model basically links the, well, let's say, take into account the multi-level treatment structure of the data, and also aims to model, let's say, the outcomes based on the outcomes are Y here, based on the treatment level and a set of covariates that matches or help to match the different individuals from different groups with similar characteristics. So the aim is basically to estimate the outcome Y for each treatment group, one you see here, and then to calculate the conditional difference of outcomes across these 3 groups. Okay, so these are the 2 main statistics that we're trying to achieve. We report here 2 estimators, the efficient influence function and the inverse probability weighting, to capture both the outcomes and differences. Now, start with some key statistics, and the point here is basically to just get to know what the data have what we have in the data and different characteristics in each level. So what we see here in table 1 is descriptive statistics across treatment groups of income. And we captured here 3 levels, or 3 different, let's say, types of income. So income, the overall income basically, that combines both pre-COVID and post-COVID. And what we observe here for all the individuals we surveyed, whether they are non-borrowers, borrowers, or those who are in a ROSCA scheme, they all have less income, or they experience, let's say, drop in income during, or let's say, post-COVID-19. And also you can, well, here we have 2 cases, case 1 and case 2. In this presentation, really, we focus on case 2. The difference is that case 1 does not distinguish between ROSCA participants in the non-borrowers and borrowers groups. However, case 2 here, we split these borrowers and non-borrowers further into non-overlapping 3 treatment groups. One is called non-borrowers, and then we have ROSCA participants, and we have borrowers. And obviously, you see that there is discrepancy in terms of, let's say, the number of observations observed under each group. And this is really what makes potential outcome methodology necessity, because you can see clearly that there are discrepancies here, but these discrepancies don't take first into account the differences in terms of the sample sizes, and also don't take into account the differences in terms of individual characteristics across the observed households. To construct basically the, or let's say construct the score, or the propensity matching score that help us to compare between, let's say, similar, let's say, households in different groups or across different groups. We use these explanatory variables, which can be classified into 2 groups or 2 sets. The set of personal and household characteristics, which include family size, literacy, child dependency, access to facilities, and home ownership. And the assets and business characteristics is the second set, which includes business experience, livestock, basically the sort of like livestock assets, and other assets available to us. Now, the choice of this is based on the significance of these variables in explaining the probability of a randomly selected individual being in one group and not in the other. So for this, we use multinomial logit to find the contributing factors that explain this probability function. So, okay, can you? All right, is my slides clear? Are my slides clear?
Yes. Yeah,
for a second actually they went blank. Right, next, basically what we did here, we estimated the 2 statistics that we are interested in. First, we are interested in the potential outcome. You see it reported under the columns 1, 2, 3, and we use 2 estimators. We can actually just focus on 1 estimator because actually both estimators give similar conclusions. We use 2 estimators because we want to make sure that our results are robust. Excuse me. So we just focus on EIF, or the efficient influence function. The column 1 refers to non-borrowers estimates. Column 2 refers to ROSCA estimates, and column 3 refers to the estimates of the potential outcome of borrowers. So what the purpose here is that we try to estimate, let's say, the outcomes that we listed: income, expenditure, luxury food, inferior food, and wheat stock. And they are basically the averages for each is, well, for each treatment. And you can see the the estimates, especially for income, you can compare directly to the table of descriptive statistics we reported. The estimated values here are slightly different from those averages that we reported in the descriptive statistics table. And the reason is basically here we're taking into account the set of explanatory variables that we discussed earlier. Now, this is the first step, but the second step, which is the main really step, is comparing the outcomes across different groups and see whether actually during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have a statistically significant difference across these treatment levels or treatment groups, and which one is, let's say, better off compared to the others. Now we see this here. Okay, you can see the difference basically here. You can actually see roughly the difference across by looking at the numbers here. But here, the purpose here is we do that statistically, like we test the null hypothesis whether the difference is statistically insignificant against the alternative whether the difference is statistically significant. So what we have here, we report the differences estimated for group 2 versus group 1, and then group 3 versus group 2. You'll see the sign and also these asterisks here, and the asterisks here refer to the statistical significance. If it is 3, then we have statistical significance at 1%, 2 asterisks 5%, and 1 asterisk is 10%. And we look also at the sign. So we're interested in the sign, the direction of the difference, and the statistical significance. Okay, what we see here is most of the cases, basically only income, okay, and wheat stock have statistically significant differences across the 3 groups. We have some, let's say, weak evidence, and the reason why we call it weak evidence is because we found the difference statistically significant at 10% under the efficient influence function, but not under the inverse probability weighting. So here we don't really have conclusive, conclusion. But for income and wheat stock, what we have is we have a statistically significant difference between the 3 groups. So what do they say? First, what we notice here is that non-borrowers have lowest income and household expenditure in terms of what we estimated, what the potential, let's say, outcome estimated for these 2 categories or 2 outcomes. We also note that ROSCA participants have higher income and expenditures than all other groups. And the difference is statistically significant. If you go back really to here, we're looking at the ROSCA participants versus non-borrowers. The difference is positive and statistically significant. What this means that ROSCA participants are better off. And then here we compare between microfinance borrowers against ROSCA participants. The difference is statistically significant at 5%, but is negative. What this means that the MFI or microfinance borrowers are worse off than the ROSCA participants. This means here from this is that ROSCA participants, or those who save more, have, let's say, well, potentially have a higher income than non-borrowers and borrowers. Now, the second significant, let's say, difference that we estimated is the wheat stock. So again, we see that in terms of stocks, wheat stock, ROSCA participants are better off than both groups. So here, the same number here is positive against when we compare between ROSCA participants and against non-borrowers. We find 4.15. These are the units of measurement. And when we compare borrowers against ROSCA participants, we found out the difference is 10% level significant and negative, which means that ROSCA participants are better off. Some other, let's say, finding that we found is that ROSCA participants, which is consistently what we expect that those with higher income have the ability to consume more, let's say, luxury foods and less inferior foods. And this is what we found. So based on what we found in terms of income, ROSCA participants as naturally have higher, let's say, purchasing power to buy, let's say, luxury food. And of course, if they have higher income, they would substitute inferior goods for luxury or for more normal goods. Here we're talking about food, really. Here, what we found that also that non-borrowers are second best when it comes to consumption of types of food. If we look at the numbers here, for example, let's say inferior food, they have 6.69. So actually, sorry, luxury food. We're talking about luxury food here, sorry. So another one is those who belong to non-borrowers. The average of consumption of luxury food is 0.24, which is higher than borrowers, which is a little surprising really compared to, well, it's against our expectation. We didn't really expect to find this value here. Well, the expectation is that we have ROSCA first because of the higher income here. And then we, based on the results on income and expenditure, we should actually expect higher, let's say, luxury food consumption in the borrower category than in non-borrower. That's not really what we found. Similarly, what we found also, we found that non-borrowers save or stock more wheat or, let's say, staple food than borrowers, which again is not really consistent with what we expected. So that's generally speaking what we really found. And the main conclusion that we draw from this so far is, because this is, we still have actually other results that we did not really discuss, but from the part that we're looking at, we suggest, well, findings suggest ROSCA participants are better off than all other groups, which really means that here our findings suggest that for, those with savings may have, savings may have higher resilience to shocks like COVID-19, especially in the short run, where most of the problems really are associated with liquidity issues, where actually people or households have, available funds to finance their consumption. So initially here, because we need more work to do on this, especially when we look at interaction between, let's say, borrowers with savings and non-borrowers with savings, and see if this might actually lead to different conclusions. We haven't done that yet, but this is one of the questions that we are thinking to investigate. But for now, what this means, what this shows that, like any economic, really, what we expect in economic, let's say, theory, when we have liquidity problems, people tend to use their savings. So households with more savings would have higher resilience to shocks like the pandemic, pandemics like COVID-19. So that's all from me. If you have, I'll be happy to take any questions, and so is my co-author too. Thank you.
Thank you, Isam and Asad. Well timed. We have 5 minutes for question answers, a quick round. So please, participants, you can either type your questions in the chat box or raise your hand, or just open the mic and go ahead.
Okay, I think perhaps we could move on to the next paper and then we can take questions for both together as it's related. Yeah, so Roxana, do you want to?
We can do.
Okay.
Please. So I repeat, you have 25 minutes in total, 20 minutes for your presentation and 5 minutes for question answers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Aisha. Shall I share? Okay. So. Okay, so in this presentation, we are going to see that how social protection measures have, they have any effect on getting the impact of COVID-19 on microfinance borrowers. And we have focused typically in the Pakistan, a special cash program there. So the main aim of this study was to analyze the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the rural population of Pakistan and their economic outcomes. And in order to investigate this, first we actually we will try to explore the specific role and impact of state-led social protection mechanism or policies as a key tool to eliminate the adverse effects of COVID-19 pandemics, and mainly focusing on the effectiveness of Ehsaas Emergency Cash Program, which was an initiative led by Pakistan government last year, which was actually distributing cash among unemployed and deserving people, those who fall under the scheme. So when we talk about social protection, before this, the World Bank organization defines social protection system as something, or as a system which helps the poor and vulnerable to cope with crisis and the shocks, to find job, to invest in health and education of their children, to protect the aging population. So means all that which comes under, you can say, the social protection which will help their livelihood. Given that this COVID-19 pandemic, if we look back, starting from health emergency in one small city, turning into global pandemic, its effect or its impact in terms was far severe than, the economic impact was far more than the health impact or the public health, you can say the effect on public health. So this resulted in different measures taken by different governments to basically to minimize the impact of COVID-19, which was imposing restrictions on travel, on you can say on movement, on you can say on gathering, or banning social gatherings or whatever gatherings. That resulted into you can say closing the workplace, and that was actually you can say which affected mostly the people who were already you can say in that poverty conditions, or you can say that this had a negative immediate negative impact on the household incomes and threatens their livelihood. So along with those restrictions, at the same time, different measures were taken by different governments in order to help people, in order to provide households with some, you can say, some kind of safety nets, such as expanding social insurance systems, which actually covers a smaller share of labor force than we have in, you can say, than comes under higher income countries. Or some of the programs were building on existing social assistance programs, which reach comparatively larger proportion of labor in developing countries. Or involving local governments and non-state institutions to identify the people who should be covered under these, you can say, circumstances, and which could not be helped through first and second, like social insurance system or any assistance programs. So coming to Pakistan, the country which we have focused with the social protection and poverty alleviation program in Pakistan, started an initiative by the name of Ehsaas Emergency Cash Payment. And this Ehsaas Emergency Initiative, basically this it was a one-time cash grant of rupees 12,000, roughly $78, to 15 million, you can say, people in 15 million actually dollars. Sorry, I can't see my screen exactly. So nearly 109 million people at the risk of extreme poverty. Overall cash disbursement was like, it was among daily wagers or who became unemployed due to closing workplaces. So in terms of rupees, it was 145 billion across the countries. The second means it was distributed in first phase and second phase. And it is one of the, you can say, highly appreciated program, and World Bank recognized it among top 4 global social protection measures based on number of people covered. So what we did in this paper, this study actually, the data, the empirical data was gathered from, it is a detailed household survey, and it has the data set consists of 508 households across different regions in rural areas, different parts of, you can say, rural Pakistan. And the data which we captured after cleaning, the data was captured actually for household related aspects and ownership of households, other asset-based indicators, food security. I mean, these are similar to the one we had for our previous paper, but for this one, the more focus was on data on recipients of state aid or the Ehsaas program. After cleaning, the data was actually divided into 4 treatment groups. Borrowers, non-borrowers, and among those borrowers and non-borrowers, the data was further, you can say, divided among those who were recipients of aid and those who were non-recipients of aid. And the effectiveness of this Ehsaas emergency cash program was measured in terms of significant changes or the outcome in terms of income, expenditure, luxury foods, and inferior foods or stock of staple storable food supplies, for example, wheat. Then after, I think, if we look for the details of these 4 groups, so we can see there were 134 people who were actually who fall in the yes category, those who were borrowers and also the receiver of, you can say, this cash Ehsaas receivers. The next, the econometric methodology, I think Sam is going to talk about this.
Thanks, Roxana. Do you want to keep the slides, or can I share my slides?
I think you can share. That will be better.
Okay. If you stop sharing, please.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Roxana. Hello again. So we use the same really. Can you see the slides? Just to make sure that. Yeah, okay. I think the slides are there. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So as Roxana discussed, so we're looking at the effectiveness of the government program Ehsaas on reducing, let's say, the impact of COVID-19 on a number of economic outcomes, including income, expenditure, luxury foods, inferior foods, and stock of staple storable food supplies. Basically, similar to the previous presentation, with the exception that here with the treatment levels are different. So what we're comparing the effectiveness of this program on borrowers and non-borrowers, recipient and non-recipient of the government aid. So we use, again, the same econometric methodology. We are interested in measuring two aspects. The first one is the outcome. But since we are interested in the effectiveness, the statistic of the great interest to us is really the sign and the statistical significance of this quantity here, which we estimate using efficient influence function and inverse probability weighting. Now, so what we expect if, well, the hypothesis we are trying not the expectation actually, is the hypothesis that we're trying to test if the program is efficient or effective. We expect a positive and statistically significant outcome. However, since we are comparing between different groups, we also want to see which group have obtained, let's say, the highest, let's say, benefit of this government aid. Again, we use the same really set of explanatory variables to actually there's one variable here missing, which is expenditure on clothing. But generally speaking, we use similar, let's say, approach. We try to estimate a multinomial logit to construct first the propensity matching score, and based on that, we can estimate the potential outcome for each treatment level, and then we compare between the different treatment levels. So here we report only the efficient influence function results because inverse probability weighting gives exactly the same conclusions. Under columns 1, 2, 3, 4, we have the estimated values of the potential outcome for each group, where 1 refers to non-borrowers and non-recipients of government aid. Column 2 reports the potential outcomes or estimated potential outcomes of non-borrowers and recipients of the government aid. Group 3 or column 3 refers to the third group, which is borrowers and non-recipient, and column 4 reports borrowers and recipient of the government aid. The asterisks, again, they refer to the statistical significance. 3 for 1%, 2 for 5%, and 1 for 10%. The potential outcomes first all of them are positive here. So the first conclusion, we see that the effect of this government aid is leading to or leads to a positive outcome for under each of the categories we have. So all actually the different groups received a boost from this from this government aid. That's the first really conclusion. So you see that the signs are positive and all the values that we estimated are statistically significant, at least at 10%. Here actually they are also statistically significant at 1%. However, when we compare between which group benefited the most from this, we find that, well, we look at first the comparison or the estimated differences across. We need to see, let's say, the sign and the statistical significance. The first thing we notice is that most of the estimated values, almost all of them, are not statistically significant. And this is the first indication that the effect of this government aid does not really benefit one group over the other. So the effect is pretty much the same. So it's effective relatively, statistically speaking, on average, by the same level, really, across all groups. We do have some few, let's say we have these two cases where we have a 10%. Well, the difference is statistically significant of 10%. The first one is inferior food. What we looked here, what we found here, we found that when we compare between the third group, which is borrowers and non-recipient, against the second group, which is non-borrowers and recipient, we found the difference is negative. What this means, it means that borrowers and non-recipient consume less because of this aid, consume less of inferior food compared to non-borrowers and recipient. So here, this third group are non-recipient of the aid. So basically, they did not receive the aid and still consume less inferior food compared to non-borrowers who received the aid. And the final, well, the second statistically significant difference is the wheat stock, where we look at difference between the second group, which is borrowers and non-borrowers and recipient of the aid, against non-borrowers and non-recipient. We find that difference is negative. What this means that the non-borrowers and recipient of aid did not really improve their wheat stock compared to non-borrowers and non-recipient of aid. Again, here what we see that even these non-borrowers received an aid from the government, they still did not really perform in terms of wheat stock better than non-borrowers who did not receive the aid. So that's basically generally what I just discussed. So we go straight to the conclusions. Now, here it is quite tricky really to make any strong statements about the program, because the program is a one-off payment of 12,000 rupees that is made at the national level, and we're looking at a very small and limited region. So it is not really, so the conclusions here are not really meant to discredit the effectiveness of this program. But what we notice here within the sample that we collected, we found two things. We found that there is a positive effect in terms of, let's say, generating positive outcomes. However, the differences in terms of, say, between non-recipient and recipient, it did not really materialize. And especially now, we can't really make a strong statement again about it, because have, let's say, a long-term view of the effect, because the data were observed, let's say, right after the program was implemented. So it is worthwhile actually to investigate further whether the program has a long-run or long-term effect instead. Well, we did not really find in our sample that there is short-run effect, strong, let's say, short-run effect, but in terms of the long-run effect, still to be investigated, which is left for future work, hopefully. That's all for us in the second talk.
Thank you very much. We have 6 minutes for question answers before we begin our next presentation.
Okay, so I would just quickly jump in and respond to the question by James. The question is about what we mean by a recommendation to promote ROSCA. So from our first paper, we said that ROSCA has been proven to be very beneficial to everyone, as we saw in the calculations. So what we suggest is that it should be promoted. Now, the thing is, what I have observed from the field work is that when credit officers go to the field to collect the installments or to formulate new groups or anything, I observed that they always mention this just casually and verbally, that make sure that you are participating in these schemes and have you formed any scheme and how are the payments coming up and everything. Now, since these are purely informal. They can't really regulate these. What they can regulate is their own mandatory savings scheme policies, which every MFI has. These are very, very, very small amounts, which they make sure that their borrowers actually set aside in their saving accounts. In Bangladesh, in Grameen Bank, it used to be 1 taka per week. I don't know, this is going back about 10 years ago, so I don't know what the current rates are. So it's a very small amount, which they keep on saving in their savings schemes. That's something that they can regulate. But as far as ROSCA is concerned, it's a purely social kind of a thing. So, but they do mention this, the credit officers. What we argue is that it should be made a bit more, you can't really formalize it, but it's something that should be promoted even more. And there's a lot of literature on the benefits of ROSCAs in both rural and urban areas across the world. So that's what we mean by when we say that ROSCAs should be promoted.
Thank you, Asad.
Okay.
The question. If there's no other question from the participant side, should we move on to our next presenters so that in the end we have some more time for question and answer session, particularly to our first presenters. We now have Arooj Jamil and Ahmed Nawaz to present a case of Akhubat Microfinance Organization in Pakistan. I hope Arooj and Ahmed Nawaz, you both are ready for this. Please unmute yourself to respond.
Thank you, Aisha. I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can hear you too.
Right. Just give me a second.
Before you start your presentation, I would just like to mention that you have 25 minutes in all. That means 20 minutes at the max for your presentation and 5 minutes in the end for question and answers. So please abide by the timings. Thank you. I hope you aren't having problem loading your files or sharing your file. Ruth, do you hear me?
I think she's connecting from another device. So
do we have Ahmed Nawaz here? Could you please?
Actually, I just connected with another device because my screen was, I was unable to share the screen from, so I'm just give me a second, please.
Aruj, I hope you're familiar with sharing your screen on Zoom, because if that's what's bothering you, we can assist you with that.
Hello. Okay, my name is Aruj, and I hope my voice is audible for everyone, and you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
All right. Okay, so I'm grateful to DSA conference organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. I, along with Dr. Ibn Nawaz, worked on a paper titled as Impact of Microcredit Program on Non-Income Outcomes. And for this, we considered a case of a Ahwat microfinance organization in Pakistan. So first of all, I would like to outline my presentation plan. So it includes aim of my paper, introduction, research methodology, main results, and then lastly, conclusion and recommendations. Okay, so basically in this paper, we made an attempt to examine the potential of microcredit program in improving those non-income outcomes of well-being, which are not generally studied extensively. And these aspects has also been referred as missing dimensions of poverty and have been outlined by Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. And they have outlined 5 dimensions. From them, I basically focused on subjective and psychological well-being and social connectedness in my study. And then I would like to suggest policies based on the findings of my study. Okay, just a very brief introduction. So we know that poverty is a global issue, and it is important to find ways to tackle it. And over the past years, we have seen that microfinance can assist in uplifting financial constraint and assist in entrepreneurial activity, and has led to numerous positive outcomes in terms of income, improved income, asset base, standard of living, and expenditure on nutrition, health, and education. And among various microfinance instruments, one of the common type is microcredit, which is basically issuance of small unsecured loan to a poor individual for either starting a new business or expanding their existing one. And microfinance industries has grown in various countries, and there are around 200 million clients around the world as reported by World Bank in 2015. And then moving towards microfinance industry in Pakistan. So we have seen that there is expansion in Pakistan as well. And this can be assessed through various outreach indicators between 2013 and 17 in terms of active borrowers, branches, staffs, and total assets. And among microfinance providers, one of the largest organization is Ahwat organization in terms of its number of active borrowers, which were around 1 million in 2018. And it primarily offers interest-free loans to its clients to set up a business or expand it. And it is important to note that beside loan disbursement, it also adopts credit plus approach, which means that it provides some extra services. And one of the main type is that it provides social guidance to its clients, whereby it aims to inculcate positive values and attitudes in their clients, such as to help other people, to make them realize the importance of educating girls, to follow the traffic rules and regulations in the society. So it tries to inculcate good positive values for their holistic development. Okay, now moving towards the research gap. So as we know that analysis of human development incorporates a wide array of domains. However, the empirical studies in the context of microcredit evaluation largely focus on certain aspects of well-being, such as income, health, education, and asset possession. And it seems to undermine the importance of considering other dimensions of human development, which include the non-income outcomes. And in my research, my main objective was to analyze the impact of microcredit program on non-income outcomes, which are generally less explored. And So the research question which I looked at was, to what extent does participation of borrowers in a Hoods microfinance program influence non-income outcomes, specifically subjective and psychological well-being and pro-social behavior and perception in clients? Then the way I collected my data and the research methodology. So in that aspect, I carried out a quasi-experimental design whereby I created a treatment group and a control group. So in treatment group, I included mature clients who have been affiliated with the Hood organization for at least 2 years. So the basic idea was that the clients who have been affiliated with longer period of time with the organization are likely to show substantial benefits that they have experienced by being part of the organization. And it is likely that the outcomes could be measurable in them. Whereas the control group comprised of initial clients who have recently joined the program and have been into it for less than 1 year. And it was held that they are unlikely to experience the substantial benefits from the organization, and they could serve as a control group or more like as non-borrowers. So then I conducted a questionnaire, and it was a quantitative approach, as I included close-ended and specific questions. And the fieldwork was carried over the period of 2 months, whereby I, along with other enumerators, interviewed the clients at their workplace, at their household, and at the branches where they went for loan repayment, and collected the data. Okay, so the indicators which I used, which were basically my dependent variables as well. So so there were 2 dimensions in which I looked at the well-being outcomes. In the first dimension, which is subjective and psychological well-being, I had 8 indicators, which were happiness, and then 5 were regarding domain-specific satisfaction of life, pertaining to housing, income, food, health, and work. And then 2 were regarding competence level. By competence, I mean that the sense of achievement which they derive from their work and how they were evaluated by other people in terms of being capable. So then moving to the second dimension, which was regarding pro-social behavior and perception, there were 4 indicators, and it included basically their how often they provide financial help to relatives, to their neighbors, how often they made donations, and the realization of importance of girls' education. So in total, there were 12 indicators which I assessed. And the way I assessed the data was I used descriptive analysis and regression analysis. In descriptive analysis, I used summary statistics and correlations. And in regression analysis, I used binary logistic technique. And so my dependent variables were which I already mentioned, were the indicators, 12 indicators. And my independent variable were basically, the main independent variable was the client type, that whether a borrower was a mature or initial client. And this would show the difference between that whether the intervention was effective in these aspects or not. And beside that, I also used some control variables, such as age, gender, deprivation score, their personality traits, and also their income levels. Okay, now moving to towards my key results. So the descriptive analysis showed that in certain aspects, mature clients performed better than the initial clients. And this included their competence levels. So mature clients felt higher sense of achievement from their work as compared to initial clients. Similarly, in the domain of pro-social behavior, I found that in terms of financial help to relatives and financial help to neighbors, and in the perception of getting girls educating, mature clients showed a higher degree, higher inclination towards this preference and behavior. Okay, now moving towards the regression results, whereby whereby one can see the relationship between the dependent and independent variables. So from this, what we figured out that whether client type was important variable or not in determining the outcome indicators. So what we found was that in the internal work competence indicator, which was regarding their sense of achievement, which they derive from their work, it was significant and positive. So it indicated that mature clients experience a higher sense of achievement from their work as compared to the initial clients. And this notion is also supported by other studies which show that participants of microcredit program tend to consider their ability to generate income as a source of pride and achievement. And also, it is also interesting that even income also played a crucial role in determining their competence indicator. Okay, then moving to in the dimension of pro-social behavior, what I found that three indicators showed significant results, whereby we saw that client type was important determinant of the dependent variable. And so basically in the domain of, again, financial help to relatives, neighbors, and realization that girls' education is also important, we saw that client type played an important role and was positive and significant. And there could be different explanation for this preference in clients. One could be that perhaps the guidance provided under a whole microcredit program promoted social values and behavior in them, or it could also be another explanation could be possible that that access to microcredit loan promotes pro-social preferences as a spillover effect, that they are being recipient of such a program may lead them to emulate the similar behavior when it comes to dealing with other people. Or it could also be the income could be also a factor, that increased income, people with increased income are more likely to engage in pro-social behavior. So overall, it was found that, moving towards the conclusion, that microcredit can be considered as a positive tool and leads to desirable outcomes. Among the different variables, we found that client type and respondent income were important determinants of several indicators. So having said that, the suggestions for future research is that future researchers may consider non-income outcomes when evaluating the microcredit program in order to get the broader concept of well-being. And then microcredit organization may also take initiative to pursue social guidance or providing some sort of lectures for their holistic development along with loan disbursement. And also, it also suggests that there should be increased access of microcredit programs to poor individuals, as it has the capacity to improve their well-being. So, thank you. If there are any comments, they are most welcome.
Thank you very much. It was an interesting piece of information for all of us. Please, the house is open for questions. I would appreciate, there's this one question. Ruj, could you please stop sharing your screen? Yeah. Stop share. Okay, there is one question to James Cooper and Orly. It is by Isam Maliki, that what is the name of the software used in the study?
Orly has sent us the link, so we've got the link in the chat.
Right, great.
Yeah. Okay, it's a great software. Actually, I had not heard about this before, so we'll have a look. I hope it's free to use. So as opposed to NVivo.
Just to chip in and say, I'm afraid we've had to develop this in R, or my colleague Steve Powell has. And so we are now producing the software commercially.
Okay.
But there is a free trial period. And we have developed it because we feel the need for it. And we're very open to discussion if you want to try it out and so on. It's
okay.
So we've gone down the commercial route with the software for the long term, but in the meantime, we're doing this as a public good because we needed it and there was nothing out there which did it. So do get in touch with it.
Yeah, the way it expresses and maps the causal relationships is really great. So there was a gap for this, which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. We'll have a look at the link. Okay, so coming back to the paper by Uruj, just a quick question on how she measured happiness. Was there a scale or something? I wonder if she's still around.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
okay. I hope I was audible.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
we are.
So basically, I measured my questions on a usually most of my questions which I measured were on 4-point scale. Okay. So we like asked the respondents that were you very happy, fairly happy, not very happy, or unhappy. So it's well basically, and then we set a cutoff point, like the one who were in the group of fairly happy and very happy. They were regarded as basically having their happiness levels, and the one which fall below that choose the other two options, not very happy or for not at all happy. So they were like regarded as being deprived in this indicator. And the idea was taken from the OPHS survey modules. And even this question was even taken from Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative survey module. They have basically given some questions under this module of subjective and psychological well-being under the missing dimensions of poverty. So most of the questions which I use in my study were taken from OPHI survey modules.
Okay, that's great, thanks. I've always felt that the way the impact of microfinance so far has been analyzed is very quantitative. You know, we keep on measuring income and expenditure and all of these kind of things, which are quantifiable. But the assessing the social impact of microfinance or any social production model is really that we need to address. And there are very few studies on this. Right. So it's good that.
Yes, Asad, I just want to add something. You know, this. Are you listening to me? Hello.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay, fine. I just want to further the debate. This happiness, the non-income outcomes. You know, it's quite common. What we took it from, you know, it's in World Value Survey and all the even the demographic and health surveys all over the world. You know, they have now it's an integral part of all those surveys. So these non-income dimensions, they are increasingly becoming more and more important. You know.
Yes.
So even the satisfaction levels, they have that all sort of ladder situation. You know, from bottom till the up, and then all those happiness indicators. You know, so they are now. It's gaining very popular now these days, you know, in all those surveys, you know. So it is quite interesting. Actually, the backdrop on the, why we included particularly these aspects when it comes to Huwath is because, you know, it's a sort of faith-based organization. It's not the conventional microfinance institution, you know, they don't charge any interest rates. So what they really emphasize during the whole process when the borrowers have attached to it, apart from, you know, the financial aspect, you know, the advocacy and the training and their ethical values and their values, the goodness, you know, they want to transmit those values to their clients. So that's why we really took this Huwath as a test case for it, because it's a perfect organization for it, whether they have an impact on, otherwise they are quite a lot, because once I've spoken to their, you know, the man who's running the show at Huwath, and he was quite worried about, because wherever in the world he goes, you know, a lot of questions, you know, were asked about the sustainability issues on a whole, because it's all charity based, you know. So that's why he just wanted to focus on that, to highlight the good thing about his organization is to basically show the rest of the world about its contribution towards the society in terms of these non-income outcomes. Otherwise, you know, there are always question marks about the sustainability issue on these organizations.
For this paper, did you collect any qualitative data as well?
Not really, but actually we wanted to do that by some focus group interviews, and because particularly this that's on the cards, this COVID episode, the whole thing. We want to capture that thing because of course you want to really capture the whole of this episode, but that's on the card, but not yet. We haven't done any sort of qualitative interviews yet.
Okay, thanks. So James has got a question on this subjective effects of microfinance.
I don't want to exclude other people from contributing, but I do think that this issue of the way access to different kinds of financial services influences social norms is really important. And I know we've got Ben Jones on the call, who's done very interesting work on this in Uganda. It is, I think, a very important issue, not just in terms of gender, but the effect on trust, on mutual suspicion, and so on. And that was raised earlier. So I think that's something we really do have to address. I would be delighted to be proved wrong, but I think trying to get it through clever designs of quasi-experimental surveys and so on, because of the selection effect problems, is so difficult because so many of these variables are unobservable and the change is slow and subtle. So quantifying these impacts is difficult, which is why I've gone down the route of let's monitor these trends through surveys, through carefully calibrated indicators, and then let's use mixed methods to get at the causal mechanisms for how is participation in different kinds of activities affecting changes in social norms and self-esteem and subjective well-being. I think that's a more robust research strategy than trying to, as it were, do both steps quantitatively when we're engaging with such long-term, subtle and complex processes of change. So that would be my encouragement, but I don't know if Ben's there, but maybe he might have some other comments on this topic.
Oh, yeah, I can come in. So thanks very much for that, James. There's a paper I've been working on at the moment. So in a way, I'm really at the far other end of the spectrum. So I work as an ethnographer, as an anthropologist, and where I normally do field work, it was just there was one savings group that would meet every Friday, and I would simply go along to the savings group because I was interested in other things. It was a good way to get people to talk about politics. It's a sort of rotating saving. It's a sort of ROSCA, but it's a rather complex structure set up by an NGO, but maintained by the members now. And that's been my most recent sort of encounter. And there's a paper maybe in draft that I've been working on, and it touches on, I suppose, where I work. What I can see is if people were to talk about microfinance, they would spend a lot of time talking about ulcers, and they would spend a lot of time talking about the stress of managing often multiple sources of sites of saving and borrowing and debt. And what's interesting for me is, of course, you have an NGO like BRAC there that's giving people individual loans, and that works in one particular way. But the paper I've been trying to write about the savings group is this incredibly social space. But because they're so ubiquitous now, they're so common in rural Uganda where I work, they're also quite important in changing the nature of sociality itself. It's very hard now to borrow a cup of sugar from a neighbor and so on, because in some ways, everyone has this membership of a savings group, often to pay, I mean, my colleague Maren Duvendak has always written about this, that it's often to meet consumption needs, school fees, health needs, rather than business needs. But but what's interesting for me, I suppose, is that, and I'm ambivalent about this, but has been the sort of the changing broader sociality that the shift towards VSLAs, ROSCAs, but also BRAC as well, features within the landscape. And I think that's maybe, as James is suggesting, that's not always easy to pick up in a survey where one's trying to look at effects in a sort of economic sense or in a household decision-making sense. But certainly where I work, people would often talk about how they are, I don't know how to say it. You're in this meeting, everyone is laughing, everyone is joking, there's lots of things going on. It's a really nice experience for me every Friday. And then there's some problems with the accounting. And then all of a sudden, everyone feels absolutely alone because it's their money that's at stake in the group. And that type of sociality you find more and more in other parts of community life and the way people manage burials or the way. So it's a very different methodological approach to the ones that have been presented here. And it's obviously, there's a complementary element, but I think there's a really big question that goes beyond a little bit the sort of neoliberal critiques that you sometimes see of microfinance by sociologists, to sort of get maybe in a more open-ended way at the shifting forms of sociality, because at least, I mean, I think it's the same in Pakistan and South Asia more generally, but just the sheer scale in a social sense, I suppose, not just in a numerate sense in terms of how many people participate in these schemes, but just how much sociality is involved in this, this type of way of going about saving and sharing or borrowing or taking loans. So it's, thanks, James, but maybe I should share my draft paper with you and I can get some, I shared it with Maren Duvendat, my colleague, and it'd be nice to get some more feedback before it comes out. But that's sort of what I've been interested in, I suppose, very much from an ethnographic sort of anthropological approach. Yeah. So
yeah. Well,
sorry.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks for these comments, Ben. I fully agree that increasingly microfinance has been too much about number crunching. So mixed methods is definitely the way forward. You collect your quantitative data, but then you always triangulate it with what people are saying on the field. You know, when I've been to the field, sometimes people tell you some wonderful stories and you capture them. And then I like to present them as boxed case studies. And they're always very valuable, the insights that they provide. So that's something that we should really encourage. And literature on this is really very scarce as compared to quantitative findings. So
I think we can also look at the aspect that I was just wondering that why don't microfinance institutions extend loans without interest? Because these are already poverty-struck people, and for them having an amount and be able to pay it back in time is a huge challenge. Besides comes this challenge of paying an extra amount, and these are already poor, underprivileged people. So I think having organizations, for instance, Hoover, to my knowledge, is one such MFI, which is extending loan without interest. So then perhaps, impact of such institutes versus those who are extending microloans, again, on some interest like other commercial loans, commercial banks. We can, make a comparison as to, what is the impact on social aspects, or let's say, on happiness scale or life satisfaction, such, social personality related variables. That could bring some, good insight into the kind of programs or the alterations that are required in these MFIs operating in developing countries and in poor countries. So I just wanted to share this thought that why don't we, just discuss or bring about this kind of debate of non-interest microloans.
you see, these non-interest ones are usually faith-based, and they are driven by the faith dimension, faith aspect. So that's why they're a bit difficult to roll out as compared to traditional interest-based microfinance kind of.
Yeah, but this study which was presented by Ruth and Dr. Ahmed Nawaz, it was based on those on that base loan. And we could see that the impact was quite pronounced with regards to, social indicators. So I was just wondering that this could be an interesting, debate, that why not encourage such kind of interventions when it comes to.
Yes, Asha. Unfortunately, we don't live in a utopian world. Actually, the reason is that you have to get a price. There is no free lunch, honestly, and you have to keep that bite alive. You got to inculcate into the borrowers the enterprising skills, and to keep that bite alive, you have to set some sort of price on it. So probably that is, and otherwise, the moral hazards and all that problems, in the long run, they will definitely creep in. That is exactly what the human nature is. So I think that is, it's basically a sort of blend of, but not altogether. If you just strip away, the interest rates, probably with all these moral hazards, I don't think that is a solution, but it could be some sort of, but particularly when it comes to the valuation perspective, probably some non-income indicators, that could have been added into it, and probably the intelligentsia and the literature, they have to now recognize that fact. Probably I think it's a sort of mixed sort of income and non-income both. Otherwise, simply non-income indicators, that's not really the solution.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this COVID-19 pandemic has, if nothing else, but it is that at least taught us this thing that whatever comes free, we take it for granted and we value it unless there's a price tag associated. That air is clean and we can just breathe as much as we can, unless we have to face this pandemic, and we value everything from social relations to clean air to breathing space, to be able to mingle or with that, we come to the end of our session, and I hope there is no further question. Thank you very much, all of you, for your wonderful work, for presenting your work with us on this forum. Thank you.